Welcome back. We're just going to jump right into this because there's quite a bit here. There's been a lot of Switch 2 news lately, and it's been driving me kind of insane, to be honest, because none of it's all that new. The only difference is that big media outlets have been reporting on the stuff that has been already speculated on for a while now. Like Eurogamer and another publication I can't remember the name of, they both were saying oh, it's coming late 2024. The Switch 2 is, and key partners have dev kits, and they're currently saying that it won't have an OLED screen, but instead have an LCD like the first model Switch. I'm like, okay, none of this is new. We knew all about this a week and a half ago when all this news broke about fucking people having dev kits already. I remember a couple weeks ago, the developers behind Metroid Dread were saying they got dev kits, not themselves, but a leak from that company said they got dev kits already. And I'm like, okay, we already know that the dev kits are going out. And current rumors, the only one that's really interesting is that there might be some, announcement or reveal at Gamescom in August or September. I forget when Gamescom is. But, yeah, it's just but they're talking about how it's not going to be an actual event where they're going to release all the information, won't be it's not going to be in the announcement time, but there will be, behind closed doors, talking to closed partners kind of meetings. And that's interesting at the very least, but that's kind of the only one that matters out of all of these leaks the last couple weeks. Because, what the hell, the only difference is that all these major news outlets are reporting on the same shit we've heard for the last couple weeks. And I guess it kind of sucks we won't have an OLED screen, but, I never was bothered by not having an OLED screen on my base model Switch. All the OLED screens I've seen, yeah, they're fantastic, but I don't think they'll markedly change the experience of playing a video game, especially because, you're probably going to play some of that at docked, so you won't necessarily matter if you're the kind of person who plays mostly docked if it has an OLED screen or not. Another interesting thing that I've heard seen online for the Switch 2 is that it could have an 8-inch screen. That would be interesting. I'd be super hyped for an 8-inch screen. And I've seen people talking about how they're super excited about the 8-inch screen, but they were saying oh, if it's gonna be 8 inches, it should be 1080p. I'm like, if it's the difference between a $300 and $350 Switch, I'd much rather have a 720p screen, if I'm being honest. And that actually might make the games run a little better if they could just have the game running at 720p, so they don't need to have as much detail in the thing, so you can conserve on battery life. Almost like how the Series X and the Series S, while the run game's almost the same, one is just at 4K or 1080p 120, while the other one does the same exact thing, but instead of 4K, it's 1440p. So it's I never really bothered by that, the lack of resolution, and I feel 720p at 8 inches is still pretty pixel dense. It's gonna look a little blocky, a little bit more blocky than what the current Switch does. But I'm if it's a good thing to make the Switch cheaper, and it actually might help long-term performance of the Switch, and it's barely any games run at the full resolution portably on the current Switch. So it's gonna look blocky regardless. For Christ's sake, a Lego game doesn't even run at 720p. It runs at 640p. It's crazy. These games aren't in portable mode, aren't really running at 720p. So I don't understand why people even care about having the 1080p screen unless you're one of those people who watch copious amounts of YouTube on the Switch, which I maintain. The Switch YouTube app sucks, and it should just be the mobile app, not the console app, because it is terrible portably. That's the last time I ever watched YouTube on Switch, and I hate it. Anyways, back to the topic at hand. Just these Switch 2 rumors are getting kind of old. Every couple of weeks, we get one or two things that are mildly interesting, and it just absolutely destroys the internet. Like, come on. How many times do we need to hear that the Switch 2 is going to be more powerful than Switch 1? That is obviously going to be the case. We don't even need to get a confirmation of a Switch 2 to know a Switch 2 is coming, because it's unlikely that Nintendo just stops making consoles, that they make the Switch and they're just like, you know what, I think we're done here. Well, we're calling it a night. We're calling it now. We're done. We're just not going to make anything anymore. Deuces. Like, that was never going to happen. It was never a question of if, of a matter of when. So it's like, seeing all these rumors discussing and saying, oh, the Switch 2 is coming, I'm like, who cares? It doesn't really matter. And it's driving me insane seeing all these news publications talking about all the same shit over and over again every week, acting like it's new or something is surprising. Like, it doesn't make any sense why this is happening. Like, I don't even understand why it necessarily matters that if it has an OLED or standard LCD screen. Because it's like, okay, yeah, it's kind of disappointing if you wanted the OLED, but like you can't really argue with it if it makes the thing cheaper. But there are some things that I do really hope that the Switch 2 has, like increased storage, because if things like Call of Duty, like Nintendo has signed contracts for it to bring to the Switch, want to come to the Switch, they're gonna need a lot of storage space. And currently, the most storage you get on a Switch, internally, is like 64 gigs on the OLED. And they can have up to like a 1 terabyte or 2 terabyte micro SD card, but like those are very expensive. And I'm just really hoping for at least 256 gigs of storage, or preferably 512 gigs, or even having like 2 models, each of commensurate storage sizes. Because like, I feel like 128 is a decent amount of storage, but I have a 256 gigabyte micro SD card in my Switch, and I'm starting to, feel like I need a bigger one. And I already was looking at Amazon earlier today, looking at how much 512 gig micro SD cards cost, and they're not that bad. You can get one of those for like $20. And so I'm like, come on, Nintendo can put a 512 gig embedded, little NAND flash packet on there. It'll be fine. It won't make the Switch more expensive or anything. But like, 256 gigs isn't that bad as a base model storage, Like, I feel like if they were to increase the storage, they might have 2 separate models, or just just pick one. So I'm like, I really do hope they have 512 gigs, but they're probably going to be something more like 256 to 128, because Nintendo sucks. Another thing that I do really hope comes to the Switch 2 is backwards compatibility. I was recently watching the Nintendo podcast. If you're watching this video, you probably have seen that podcast at some point. And they were discussing backwards compatibility in their most recent episode, and I was kind of going fucking insane when they were discussing backwards compatibility and how Wood was just not thinking it's gonna come and being a very Debbie Downer about that. And I'm like, I don't think if the Switch gets backwards compatibility, it's gonna be the reason why it fails, because that's kind of how he was framing it. Because I don't understand his argument behind that, and he's not the only one I've heard this from, but like, even my own brother has had the same argument, that the Switch having backwards compatibility makes people want to buy less new games, or feel like they need to buy new things, or even buy the new Switch. And I'm like, that's not a great argument, because like, Nintendo's best-selling console of all time, the Wii, literally had backwards compatibility with the GameCube, with controllers, memory cards, and games. So I don't understand that argument necessarily. All the handheld devices had some form of backwards compatibility. The Game Boy Advance could play all versions of the Game Boy games. Game Boy Color could play Game Boy Color and Game Boy games. The DS Lite could play DS and Game Boy Advance games. 3DS could play 3DS and DS games. And Wii U could play Wii U games and Wii games. The one time in the last 2 decades Nintendo's been making game consoles that didn't have some form of backwards compatibility was the Switch, because it was radically different. So unless they were going to put a 3DS game cartridge slot on the Switch, that was going to happen, and there was no way you're going to fucking put a disk drive in the Switch. So of course there was no going to be backwards compatibility to the Switch. And so I'm like, this makes complete sense. I'm not even talking about full like if the cartridges are different. Allow digital games if you have digital purchases to make the conversion over. Because like I don't understand most people's argument behind it, because like it could only increase, like it'll never take away, it'll only ever increase. Because like it's gonna be great if you just got the Switch 2, you got all your old games, and now you can keep playing those until the new games come out. Because at the beginning of the Switch, there was like 6 launch titles, and half of them were garbage. And so I was like, if the Switch 2 has a very similar poor launch, which it probably wouldn't, but it'd just be nice to have all your previous games to play. Imagine if the Switch had, and it's physically impossible, I know, but had some form of backwards compatibility to the Wii U in some way, theoretically. And in that launch, you only had 6 launch titles, and 1 was good and the rest was terrible. But you once you finish Breath of the Wild, you're like, well, now I have nothing to play. But if it had some form of backward compatibility with the Wii U, which I know is impossible, I'm saying that I know it's impossible, but if it did have some form of backward compatibility, you could go from playing Breath of the Wild to playing 3D World. I think that's what the Wii U version was called. Or you could play New Super Mario Bros. U or Donkey Kong Country. Like, you could play all sorts of games on the Switch if it, at that time, if it did have backwards compatibility in some form. So I'm just saying, like, it will probably never hurt to have backwards compatibility, but only help. Because, like, now, not only do you now have the new console, but you can play all your old stuff until the new stuff comes out. Because I know I never buy all the launch titles, and I know I don't buy consoles when they first drop because of that reason. Because I don't like the waiting to get something new. Because, like, the only reason why I ended up buying an Xbox One was because after, like, 3 years of it already being out, is because I had nothing I wanted to play. None of the new games for the last 3 years were good. And I didn't even want them on my 360 if they did have 360 versions. So it's like, I didn't really care. I didn't want to play Halo 5. I didn't want to play any of those launch titles. So I was like, I'm just going to wait until there's something I want. But if I can play all my games I already have, I have no reason not to buy the new thing and just play my old games until the new stuff comes out. It's like perfect. And if there's some way for them to run better on the Switch 2, like if you go and buy a Switch 2 and you have all your old games because of backwards compatibility, they could theoretically run better on the Switch 2. So you don't have to have crappy resolution, or you don't have to have a crappy frame rate. You could have like the best, playable experience for these Switch games that had a hard time running on the original Switch. You could have a bug-free version of Scarlet and Violet because that game has terrible performance on the Switch. You could theoretically have a seamless experience on Switch 2, thanks to having backwards compatibility, instead of just leaving that game to rot as it is now, stuck on the Switch if the Switch 2 comes out. So I feel like it's just a great opportunity to breathe new life into older games on Switch that were less optimized. So it's like you could theoretically play The Witcher on Switch 2, hopefully not at 540p portably. Hopefully it will not be a stuttery mess or a blurry mess. It would run relatively well on Switch 2. So at least that's my hope. Hopefully it has backwards compatibility, because I don't feel like some people do, this would hemorrhage sales or be the cause of why the Switch 2 doesn't do too well. The next thing I hope for the Switch 2 has is redesigned Joy-Cons. I don't even care if my Joy-Cons are no longer compatible with the new Switch. I could give two shits. I hate the Joy-Cons. So at the very least, I hope that they redesign the Joy-Cons to be 1, more comfortable, 2, more durable. But if they have to fully get rid of that and redesign it from the ground up, and now they can't use old Joy-Cons on new Switch, I'm fine with that. I could give two shits. I'm like, yeah, feels bad if you invested into all your money into a bunch of Joy-Cons. I have never bought extra Joy-Cons. All I've done in terms of buying Joy-Cons is buying the Hori Split Pad Pro, which I'll probably make a video about that at some point. But like it's a fantastic controller. The one downside is it's portable mode only. Can't use it wirelessly. And so I had to buy those because my Joy-Cons fell to drift, and I was too lazy to mail it to Nintendo. So I don't really give a shit. But it's like I hope so much that they find some way to make the Joy-Cons in Switch 2 less shit. Well, that about covers it for today's video. What are your thoughts on the Switch 2 rumors? Are they driving you insane too? Because I know they are making me insane. Leave a comment down below. I would love to hear. Don't forget to like and subscribe and all that other social media garbage down below. And don't forget to have a wonderful day.